disagree with the Israeli government, but you can't call for genocide. That moves into anti-Semitism, and that should be something that we actually speak out on and make very clear on every single campus.
When it comes to the ongoing bombardment of Gaza, U.S. officials don't see a problem. They say no evidence of genocide. Carry on, Israel. However, the protests against Israel's bombing have gotten a lot of scrutiny. Despite the involvement of plenty of Jewish students and plenty of statements otherwise, U.S. officials insist that there's probably a way these protests are somehow a form of coded anti-Semitism. And the ongoing police crackdown on the protesters has highlighted the inconsistency of U.S. officials and their rhetoric about human rights and freedom of speech.
The students is symbolic on the crackdown on the people of Palestine, of Gaza, and it's being perpetrated in the name of my religion. Zionism and the whole state is masquerading. It's a nationalism, it's a flawed nationalism, it's totally contradictory to serving God.
It's showing the true teeth of the oppression of this country. They say we're a free country, but the minute we do something they don't like, they send the cops in on us. If that's not fascism, I don't know what is.
It shows, what did Gandhi say? Gandhi said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you. We're at the fight you stage. You know what comes next, then you win. Yeah. So, they're afraid. It shows their fear.
Imagine that these protests were happening in China or Russia or Iran. U.S. media would be singing their praises and condemning the crackdown. But as students get expelled or suspended from their universities and dragged away by police, U.S. media just repeats the same old message.
Peaceful protests have been hijacked by those aggressive, spewing anti-Semitic and anti-Israel and at some fronts, anti-American rhetoric.
These folks took over building. They hurled anti-Semitic comments. It's just a sad testament to where our higher education institutions are.
It's an organized mob trying to ensue chaos and breed anti-Semitism.
So, of course, now we hear about George Soros, the notorious globalist billionaire who's reportedly funding some of the pro-Gaza mobilizations.
These are funded by many of the same outside groups like George Soros, other dark money groups that support Antifa and other riots that we've seen in our American cities in the past few years.
George Soros has been funding protests across the world in places like Ukraine and Yugoslavia for years, and generally bringing it up and talking about the Open Society Institute or the various NGOs that fund demonstrations and regime change operations gets you dismissed as a conspiracy theorist in Western countries. But now that the protests against Israel's bombardment of Gaza are taking place, suddenly the activities of Protest Incorporated are being brought up with outrage, with protests against Israel's bombing of Gaza growing around the world, with encampments and demonstrations happening on an almost daily basis, reflecting what is majority sentiment around the world. At this point, American officials are having to unexpectedly rework their script about protests and human rights and oppressive regimes. Looks like they're getting a little bit of their own medicine. Time to wake up and smell the ashes. Caleb Maupin, RT, New York.